Okay, well, thank you and welcome everyone at Nature Vancouver. My Zoom presentation this evening is an introduction to the bird monitoring and banding program at Colony Farm. And local and regional parks, of course, provide critical oases for breeding and migratory birds. Like birding, banding is an early morning activity as birds are most active in the period immediately following dawn when they're actively foraging. So the good news is you get to watch the mist rising over the old fields where we band. The bad news, of course, is that we have to set alarms for 3:30 a.m. in the summer months to meet at 4:30 a.m. for sunrise at 5 o'clock on our weekends off. But of course, it's all worth it when you get the chance to hold a male lazuli bunting like this, the quintessential bird of Colony Farm. So can everybody see my screen okay? You can all see the screen. Hopefully you all can. So this presentation is designed to provide a broad overview of who we are and the purpose of bird banding, to explain how it works and review some of the results of the last 10 years of monitoring at Colony Farm. I'll also talk about our vision for VARC and the banding program, and hopefully whet your appetite to come out on a Nature Vancouver field trip with some of the photos of the species that we've banded. So VARC is a registered Canadian charity, and our mandate, as I was saying earlier, has two key components: to provide data and research support to safeguard habitat for breeding and migratory birds, and to provide public outreach and education to raise awareness of environmental issues as they relate to birds. Before we get into explaining the banding program, I'd like just to take a few minutes to consider the state of the world's birds. An assessment by BirdLife International on the conditions and trends of the world's birds provides an insight into the wider state of biodiversity. And biodiversity is the world's natural wealth. Our social and economic well-being depends on it. It provides us with vital goods and services, maintains the life-sustaining systems of the biosphere. Our very futures depend on it, and yet biodiversity is being lost faster than ever. The status of the world's birds is deteriorating, with more and more species at risk of extinction, and the number of bird species listed as critically endangered has reached an all-time high. This number increases every year, and we now have 1,469 species. That's 1 in 8 of the world's birds threatened with extinction. And some of these species have not been sighted for many, many years and are likely already extinct. Over the last decade, BirdLife partners have worked to assess the conditions and trends of the world's birds. And what we know about the changing state of the world's birds is that many bird species, including common ones, are declining. Farmland birds in Europe have shown marked declines in the past 3 decades. Almost half of 124 common birds in Europe have declined across 20 European countries. And birds like corn bunting and turtle dove, really once very, very common birds. I grew up just north of London in central Hertfordshire, and corn buntings and turtle doves were common farmland birds. And you can see the declines of both of these species by 90% and 95% respectively. Water birds are showing widespread declines, particularly in areas such as the Yellow Sea region in Asia. And this has had an especially devastating effects on long-distance shorebird migrants that rely on intertidal mudflats to refuel for their journeys. Studies of resident Australian waders reveal that 81% of their populations have disappeared in the last 25 years. More than 50% of all water bird populations are declining, all due largely to widespread loss of wetland habitats. Shorebirds really are my favorite group of birds, and I've been lucky enough to see most of the world's shorebirds on my travels around the globe, including spoon-billed sandpiper, of which there are now fewer than 100 pairs remaining. In an ever more crowded world, species that need lots of space, such as great Indian bustard, are losing out. The population of India is expected to reach 1.8 billion people by 2050, at which time there will be 10 billion of us on the planet. And of course, birds that need lots of space are simply losing out. Long distance migrants are declining, and when you see the threats to long distance migrants, not only on their winter grounds, but on their breeding grounds and at stopover sites along the way, it's really not surprising. And especially those that winter in the humid zone of Africa, there's been a 73% decline in those species. And we tend to think of these problems as other countries' problems and not ours. But the State of Canada's Birds Report shows that more species are declining than increasing, and dramatic declines in groups like our aerial insectivores, grassland birds and shorebirds, all attributed to the impacts of human activities. Swallows are part of the guild of aerial insectivores we were talking about a few moments ago, birds that specialize in feeding on flying insects, and they've really shown precipitous declines. Population of barn swallows have fallen by more than 80% in Canada, bank swallow by 98%, cliff swallow, northern rough-winged swallow and purple martin, all by more than 60%. More than 1,200 IBAs, important bird areas, have been identified around the globe, but many are in an unfavorable state and nearly half lack any real legal protection at all. So why are birds declining so precipitously? Well, a range of threats are driving these declines. The greatest expansion of agricultural land in recent years has taken place in the tropics, with things like oil palm plantations in Malaysia and vast industrial scale monocultures, which has caused large scale declines of farmland birds. Each year, longline, gillnet and trawl fisheries are responsible for the incidental deaths of hundreds of thousands of seabirds. BirdLife's Albatross Task Force with the RSPB from the UK has been working with trawl fleets to reduce this bycatch and has succeeded in significantly reducing the scale of the problem. But each year, hundreds of thousands are still killed. Seabirds are threatened at a faster rate globally than all other groups. 19 of the 22 species of albatross are threatened with extinction, including this bird, the critically endangered Chatham albatross. The introduced house mouse has had a devastating impact on seabird populations on remote islands in the southern Atlantic, places like Hawaii and New Zealand now almost devoid of native land birds. Contamination of food sources, like the widespread use of diclofenac, used as an anti-inflammatory drug in treating livestock in Asia, has had a devastating effect on vultures. 30 years ago, tens of millions of white-rumped vultures were flying the skies of Asia. It was the most abundant large bird of prey in the world. It's now on the brink of extinction. Population has declined by 99.9% since the early 1990s. And this has had an impact on humans too, with increases in diseases like tuberculosis, anthrax, and foot and mouth disease. And despite alternative safe drugs being readily available, diclofenac has been authorized for use in domestic animals in Spain, where 80% of all European vultures are found. And it's also now widely becoming available on the EU market. So it's almost as though we really don't learn by our mistakes. And then there's unregulated hunting. Egypt is the worst place to be a migratory bird. 140 million birds are trapped during full migration. Hundreds of kilometers of nets and shade traps and ground snares, lime-coated sticks are put out. And those that escape face hunters with guns at every oasis or shaded grove of acacias along the way. And that's in addition to the estimated 25 million birds killed in the Mediterranean each year. And then climate change. Climate change poses a serious threat to nearly half of all the bird species in Canada. Some species only survive within a tiny climate bubble. Mercury pollution has risen nearly 50-fold in ivory gulls in the Arctic over the past 130 years, further clear evidence of the global and circumpolar impacts of human activity on Arctic wildlife, which is already stressed by the most pronounced climate change on Earth. So what do we need to do? What do we need to do? The first thing we need to do is to invest in conservation. $80 billion a year is needed to protect all of nature, and just $4 billion could improve the status of all threatened species. Elon Musk's net worth a couple of weeks ago went up by 10.2 billion in one day, in one single day. 4 billion is insignificant compared to the global economy. $70 trillion a year. A trillion, I think, is a million. I don't know, it's so many zeros. Apple made 18 billion profit in one quarter, the biggest corporate profit in history. They've just been valued themselves at $2 trillion. So the amount that needs to go back into conservation really is pocket change when compared to the global economy. So we need to invest in conservation and also do things like, work with fisheries management organizations to reduce albatross declines, conserve IBAs, and help save species from extinction. The good news is there are a number of conservation success stories, but conservation really requires information, science-based, indisputable evidence to local, national, and international policy and decision makers. All of these species were once reduced to just a few remaining individuals, and now all have much healthier populations as a result of concerted research, conservation efforts, and recovery programs. Research and monitoring really is essential to guide successful conservation and management actions. And the strongest finding in the State of the Birds report was simple, and that is that conservation works. Conservation works, and research makes the difference. And that really is what bird monitoring and banding is all about, to kind of close the loop. It's about providing science-based, indisputable evidence, because research has shown that decision makers put a lot of value on the quality of the science. And if you have indisputable evidence on board, the discussion changes to what can we do to get these birds back again. And that really leads us to why we ban birds. Bird banding data is useful in research, management, and all sorts of conservation projects. The individual identification of birds makes possible studies of dispersal and migration, behavior and social structure, lifespan and survival rates, reproductive success, and population growth and dynamics. We haven't got time this evening to talk about all of these topics, but we'll take a look at how banding is used in a couple of these research and management areas, in the areas of migration and in the areas of in the area of population dynamics. So let's look at dispersal and migration first of all. The ability of migrants like this orange-crowned warbler to deposit fat sufficient to fuel the energy demands for one whole night's migration is critical to their survival and to their long migrations to and from the neotropics. Many of the birds that we banned have high fat loads, either initially or on their stopovers here, which can typically last for a few days to up to a week or more. And by recording the measure of visible fat on migrants caught for banding, and then documenting changes through subsequent recaptures, allows us to directly assess the quality and value of the habitat these birds are using at Colony Farm. So many of the birds that we banned have large fat loads. And this is a really great slide, which I'll talk you guys through with the laser pointer here. And this photograph is of a migrant warbler, and the bird is upside down here. So the head is at this end, and the feet you can see up this end. So we're looking at the underside of the bird, and we've slightly dampened the feathers so you can see this underside here. And you can basically see three separate areas here. And the yellowish mound to the right center of the photograph is a large furcular fat deposit. The area, the yellowish mound to the left center is a large abdominal fat deposit. And the reddish area between is the pectoral musculature, the so-called flight muscles, which are attached to the bird's keel or sternum. The caloric density of this amount of fat is easily sufficient to sustain the energy demands of a small migrant warbler like this one, making a non-stop nocturnal flight of maybe 700 kilometers or more. And that's one of several such flights that this small bird needs to make to take it from its Central American winter grounds to its Canadian nesting grounds. And this is one of millions of songbirds that are traveling huge stretches of sky by night and then finding places like Colony Farm during the day to shelter and rest and refuel on these amazing long migratory journeys. And a small migrant warbler like this one can double its lean body mass while it's with us for a short period of maybe a week, from maybe 6 grams to as much as 12 grams or more. So banding data really allows us to prove the significance of the habitat the birds are using. We may see birds at Colony Farm, but what are they doing there? Are they just passing through, or are they actually using Colony Farm as a stopover site to refuel? And I'll talk about this a little bit more later on. And just looking at migration, and we were talking about this on one of the groups this week, if we think that 700 kilometers is a long distance migration for a bird, look at the longest non-stop migration. The longest non-stop migration is by a bird called bar-tailed godwit that makes the 11,000 kilometer migration from Alaska to New Zealand in 8 days without stopping. So again, what these birds do is they feed on mollusks, worms, and aquatic insects, and then they wait for low pressure systems to form over the coast of Alaska to push them off the coast to make this phenomenal journey all the way down to New Zealand in 8 days, 11,000 kilometers. And these birds are able to sleep by shutting down half of their brains. It's called unihemispheric slow wave sleep. But to put that into perspective, it's equivalent to a human running at more than 70 kilometers per hour without stopping for more than a week. The fastest migrant is another endangered species, a species called great snipe. These birds make the 6,800 kilometer journey from Sweden to Central Africa in 3.5 days without stopping, flying at almost 100 kilometers an hour. And a little bit of trivia for you, the word sniper originated in the 1700s amongst soldiers in British India. And if a hunter was skilled enough to bring down an elusive snipe, he was called a sniper. So that's where the word sniper comes from. And even our smallest birds, like rufous hummingbirds, have amazing long distance migrations. These birds breed as far north as Alaska and overwinter in Mexico. These tiny dynamos, they weigh 3 grams. Their wings beat at 80 beats a second. They take 500 breaths per minute in flight, and their hearts beat at over 1,200 beats per minute. And these tiny little dynamos can fly more than 1,300 miles without stopping. The longest migration of any songbird is the northern wheatear, a bird from Baffin Island in northeastern Canada, crossed the Atlantic to winter in western sub-Sahara Africa. But 2 wheatears banded north of Fairbanks, Alaska, flew over the Bering Sea and through northern Russia and Kazakhstan before crossing the Arabian Desert to winter in areas of Sudan, Uganda, or Kenya. The Alaskan bird's average round-trip distance, 30,000 kilometers, is the longest known migration of any songbird. And these are birds that have a body mass about the same as a purple finch or a song sparrow, about 23, 24 grams. And when I first saw this report, I just completely marveled at it. And I took a moment to go into Google Maps to try to navigate my way from Alaska all the way down to East Africa. And you can just see this incredible journey that these birds made, north of Fairbanks, across the Bering Sea, through Russia, through Kazakhstan, through the Arabian Peninsula, to overwinter in areas of East Africa, in Sudan and Kenya. And the geolocators that were attached to these birds were then collected when the birds returned the following spring to the exact same area. And that's one of the amazing things that we're able to do through banding and through geolocators, is to pinpoint precise winter areas for various species. So the question is, how do they do it? How do they do it? How do birds return to precisely the same site they occupied previously? Well, we know that birds use polarized light, the constellations, the Earth's magnetic field, and visual landmarks to navigate. But it still doesn't explain why a bird like blackpoll warblers overwinter in South America, and then spring migration, they come up through the Caribbean, through Florida, and up through the US to breed in Canada's boreal forest. But then in the fall, they all amass on the eastern seaboard and then choose to spend 4 days and 4 nights over water to return to their winter grounds in Colombia and Venezuela. So there's still so much that we don't know about migration. The other topic that I touched on briefly was the role of bird banding in understanding bird populations. And to better understand population dynamics, it's important to know the percentages of males and females and the different age classes. And we do that by studying plumage characteristics, breeding characters, molt patterns, biometric measurements, and look at the process of skull ossification in young birds as well. As banders, separating a bird in juvenile plumage from an adult is pretty easy. There are lots of characteristics of birds in juvenile plumage, like this hat-cheer willow flycatcher here with the buffy wing bars that you can see, and prominent gape and bright mouth lining that you can see here, and the buffy wing bars. So with birds in the hand, there are lots of additional characteristics that we can look at to separate birds in juvenile plumage from adults. So that's really easy during the early summer months. But birds don't stay in juvenile plumage for very long before they go through their annual molt for the first time, called the preformative molt. And at that time, they look just like their adult counterparts. And that's when we have to understand the whole thing of molt patterns to separate them. And the key to aging North American land birds in the hand is understanding molt sequences, which is what we teach in our bird monitoring and banding workshops. And with this knowledge, we can continue to separate first-year birds from adults. Sexing birds is obviously easy in sexually dimorphic species like our spotted towhees here, and we don't need birds in the hand to necessarily do that. Males, of course, are glossy black, have glossy black cowls, and females, of course, are much duller, brownish cowls compared to males. But many species are sexually monomorphic. Species like our savanna sparrow here on the left-hand side and white crowned sparrow on the right-hand side are sexually monomorphic, meaning males and females look exactly the same. So through binoculars, we couldn't tell whether these are males or females. But during the breeding season, we can separate males and females by looking for breeding characteristics. Males during the breeding season develop what are called cloacal protuberances, where the cloaca becomes narrow at the base and swollen at the tip. And the purpose of that is to assist with copulation and to store sperm. Females don't develop swollen cloacas, but females, of course, do most of the incubation. So females shed the feathers of their breast, and then you can see that the skin becomes really fluid-filled, and the number of veins and arteries beneath the surface increases. And the purpose of that is to transfer body heat to the eggs for incubation. So during the breeding season, we're able to separate sexually monomorphic birds by looking at breeding characteristics. So let's look at how banding works. For those of you who don't know, our banding station is in Colony Farm Regional Park, which is a 260-hectare park at the confluence of the Fraser and Coquitlam rivers. And the old fields, hedgerows and wetlands there provide habitat for over 200 bird species. And our station here is in an off-limits area to the public, in an area called Wilson's Farm North, the area illustrated by the laser pointer here. So let's take you on a real quick virtual net lane tour via drone for just the next minute or so, and hopefully you can see the net lane tour. You should also be able to hopefully hear music. So hopefully that's whetted your appetite for coming out for a Nature Vancouver field trip. So when we're not banding, as you saw on the drone footage there, we're not banding, nets are furled tightly closed, and they're tied back to the brush in a way that prevents any loose netting escaping, even in strong winds. Nets are opened by pushing loops attached to vertical and horizontal trammels up between two mist net poles. Nets are about 10 feet high and 12 or 18 meters long. And we have up to 40 of these nets deployed out in the old field habitat and woodlands in Wilson's Farm North. This is a close-up of part of a mist net showing the horizontal trammels. You can see the horizontal trammels here, with all of this soft netting in between to form a long shelf or pocket. As birds are flying through the brush, they're retained in the pocket and extracted and placed into soft cloth bags. We attach a peg to each bag to identify which net the bird has been extracted from. And we also have red pegs, which identify birds for priority processing. And those are birds such as insectivores, hummingbirds, dependent fledglings, incubating females, birds which need to be processed quickly and returned to the area adjacent to the net from which they were extracted. Birds are then banded with obviously a uniquely numbered band. You can see on our purple finch here, the band has a 4 number prefix and a suffix below, and the bird will wear that band on its tarsus for the rest of its life. So if we retrap the bird, it's caught at another banding station, or the bird is found dead and the band reported, we know part of the bird's life history. Identification of birds in the hand is really important, and it does give us an opportunity to separate similar species in the hand. And 3 birds here that look quite similar, that you guys, I know many of you are expert birders, will know that the bird on the left is red-eyed vireo, the one in the middle, warbling vireo, and the one on the extreme right, Philadelphia vireo, which of course is a rare bird for us. But these birds are treetop birds. They're often hard to see unless they're singing away in the upper canopy. But in the hand, we have the ability to take biometric measurements and to look at wing shape or wing morphology. And you can see our red-eyed vireo versus warbling vireo. Wing and tail lengths are different. But also the exposed culmen, the length of the upper mandible from the base of the feathers to the tip, is clearly significantly longer in red-eyed vireo than warbling vireo. Separating warbling vireo from Philadelphia vireo, we do with wing morphology, with wing shape or wing morphology. Philadelphia vireo has an almost absent or minuscule primary 10, a vestigial tiny P10, which is almost absent, and it separates it from warbling vireo, where primary 10, the outermost primary, is still vestigial, but it extends beyond the primary coverts. So we identify the bird to species, we band the bird, we age and sex the bird using the techniques that we teach in our workshops, and then we take a number of biometric measurements. The main 2 measurements we take on every bird are the wing chord, the length of the unflattened wing, and the tail length, as we're taking here on this western wood pewee. And we use basically a wing rule where the wrist of the bird or the carpal joint of the bird is slid up to the top of the wing stop. And then we allow the wing to lay in its natural convex position on the wing, and we measure the longest primary in millimeters. We use a soft, flat tail rule to insert between the central rectrices, which we slide up to the bird's pygostyle, and then measure the longest tail feather in millimeters. The next thing we do is we assess each bird for fat. Birds store fat in 3 areas, between the fused clavicles you saw before in the furculum here, in the wing pits, and the abdomen. The area where it's easiest to see is here in the furculum. So by blowing the feathers of the throat, the feathers pop back to reveal the hollow concave of the furculum, where we can assess fat deposits. And here's some photographs of fat deposits on black-headed grosbeak. Here is the furculum, the fused clavicles of the bird with a furculum that is completely empty versus the fused clavicles of this bird on the right-hand side here, where you can see this yellowish mound of fat is completely filled the furculum. And this is an illustration of the wing pits, the fat deposits on the wing pit of a black-headed grosbeak, and an enormous abdominal fat deposit as well. So this is a great example of a black-headed grosbeak that is maximally fat loaded. And birds in the park at this time of the year, just before migration, they feed on the berries and insects and amass these huge amounts of fat. So you can see this huge furcular fat deposit, and this huge abdominal fat deposit on our black-headed grosbeak here. The lean body mass of a black-headed grosbeak is normally 38 to 40 grams. This bird was 72.2 grams and had almost doubled its lean body mass ready for migration. So that's all the things that we do. The bird is identified to species, banded, aged and sexed, measurements taken, assessed for fat, and then weighed using a small digital scale. You can see our rufous hummingbird here weighing in at a mighty 3.3 grams. The smallest bird we've caught at this station is the smallest bird in North America, Calliope hummingbird, weighing in at 2.9 grams. All of that data is recorded and the bird is released and sent on its way. The time that it takes us to process a bird is about 2 minutes. It's about 120 seconds. So some of the results from our 10 years of monitoring at Colony Farm. This is our diversity list. We have now banded 99 species of birds with some rare and uncommon species, as you can see. Birds like American redstart, brewer's sparrow, brown thrasher, clay-colored sparrow, least flycatcher, lasbies, of course, are relatively common at lazuli buntings, are relatively common in Colony Farm. But some other birds there, olive-sided flycatcher, northern water thrushes are rare transients. We normally catch 1 or 2 at this time of the year. Swamp sparrow, western palm warbler, yellow-breasted chat. So we're still waiting for our 100th species, all trying to guess what it may be. This is our abundance chart, almost 45,000 birds processed, and 21% of those have been retrapped. And retraps are very important because they can tell us much about habitat preferences and site fidelity. Notable species here in terms of their abundance in the park. Just look at the numbers of Lincoln sparrows and purple finches here, and also species that we wouldn't really expect in old field habitat. Like McGilvrey's warblers here. We've banded over 200 of them. As you guys that are birders know, McGilvrey's warblers prefer open woodland with dense understories. Dusky flycatchers, we've banded 20 and another couple this year. They prefer drier chaparral habitat, again, that you wouldn't necessarily expect them in the old fields at Colony Farm. Some significant retraps, black-headed grosbeak here that we banded in 2011 and we retrapped in 2018, was a longevity record for this species. And just look at our Swainson's thrush here, this super long-distance migrant that we've retrapped 22 times between 2015 and 2018. And you know, that really tells us a lot about site fidelity. These birds coming back to exactly the same place. And the really interesting thing here is that we often retrap these birds in the very same net. So these birds are not just coming back to the Lower Mainland or Vancouver or Coquitlam or Colony Farm, but to specific areas within the park, which is why it's so important that we safeguard our habitat for these returning birds to breed. And our banding statistics summary, we've now amassed over 73,000 net hours thanks to dedicated volunteers, all volunteers at VARC, sacrificing their weekends and setting alarm clocks at unearthly hours to band from sunrise to 5 hours following between our main months of operation between April 1st and October 31st. So the conclusions we've been able to draw is that colony farm is a critically important area for both breeding and migratory birds. And this information is being used by Metro Vancouver to guide the development of their best management practices as they continue to develop the sustainability plan for the park to incorporate recreation with wildlife in the park. So our mandate, VARC's mandate has two key components. As I said earlier, to provide data and research support to safeguard habitat for birds and to provide public outreach and education to raise awareness of environmental issues as they relate to birds. And we do that through presentations and public events and visitor programs, which now include schools and youth programs and VARC family days. COVID has enabled us to use technology to increase our public outreach, particularly with schools. We've now developed an in-classroom schools program, which can be delivered in person or virtually. And of course, when we get people out to the banding station, the focus of all of these events is to raise the level of awareness through hands-on interaction with wild birds. And there's an orange crown warbler here, lying in the hand. Birds will often do that for a moment or two once they've been banded. If you lay them on their back, it's not dead or dying, and it will stay there for a moment until we just flip our hand and turn it upright, which gives people an incredible opportunity to see some of our resident and migratory birds up close and personal. And it's obviously really super impactful with kids. There's a little girl that came down to help us with our tree swallow nest box monitoring program that we were doing. We've done a lot of work with kids. Our schools, youth and family day programs have been hugely successful. Again, research in the UK shows that 80% of kids between 8 and 12 these days are completely disconnected from nature. So getting kids back out there, like the Catch and the Spirit group, and getting kids to interact with wild birds is hugely impactful in terms of getting these kids to reconnect with nature. Here's kids here at one of our VARC family days. A lot is being talked about regarding what's called nature deficit disorder in kids. And it's referring to an alleged trend that kids are spending less and less time outdoors, resulting in a wide range of behavioral problems. So getting kids outdoors, engage with nature, is very, very impactful for all children. And it's not just kids as well, it's adults. Getting kids down is important, but also getting adults down is equally important, because no one who holds and releases a rufous hummingbird can fail to be captivated by these tiny dynamos with wings beating at 80 beats a second and hearts beating up to 1,200 beats a minute in flight. Again, their breathing rate over 500 times a minute during flight, compared to humans, which is just 14 to 18 times a minute. And this is normally the reaction we get when someone releases a hummingbird from their hand. So just a few photographs of some of the birds that we've banded to leave you with this evening. Gorgeous myrtle warbler, yellow-headed blackbird, western tanager, male Anna's hummingbird, rufous hummingbird, gorgeous male McGilvra's warbler, Nashville warbler, Cassin's vireo, our western palm warbler was a good bird a few falls ago. House wren, we're catching increasing number of house wrens, golden crown sparrow, bank swallow, Hammond's flycatcher. Flycatchers are really, really interesting. I love puzzling over the Empedonyx flycatchers. We've banded 5 species in the park, and they are going up to the top here. Willow flycatcher, Hammond's flycatcher, dusky flycatcher, Pacific slope flycatcher, and least flycatcher here in the middle. And I've actually written an MPID guide to separating these species in the hand. We're still waiting for a grey or yellow-bellied flycatcher to show up. That would be a nice 100th species. But separating these birds is a real puzzle. It's hard for birders. It's easier for banders with birds in the hand. And the way that we separate them is by using wing morphology. So the only Western MPID with an emarginated primary 6, this feather here, they have 10 primaries. The 10th is full in length. We look for this feather first of all. And if this feather is not emarginated, it really separates willow flycatcher from all of the other MPIDs that we get in the park. So that's what we really start with, and we then drill down to the rest of the wing morphology to determine ID. If that primary 6 is emarginated, there's a whole slew of other very similar MPIDs it could be. And two very similar ones are dusky and Hammonds, but wing morphology is completely different. So wing morphology or wing shape is very important with these guys. And just look at the long primary projection of the Hammond's flycatcher on the right, and the primary tip spacing as well. It's with that large gap between primary 5 and 6 compared to the very short primary projection and fairly evenly primary tip spacing of our dusky flycatcher on the left. Dusky is also the slimmest MPID with a contrastingly white outer edge to the outer tail feather, the outer rectrix here, as you can see. And you can see with Hammond's that the outer primary is longer than one of the inner primaries, P4. So a nice shot of Hammond's flycatcher in the hand, again showing that extremely long primary projection. Hermit thrush, barn swallow, gorgeous male black-headed grosbeak were really one of my favorite species in the park. Eastern kingbird, white-throated sparrow, western meadowlark, Wilson's warbler, northern water thrush, northern shrikes. They overwinter in the park, as you guys may well know. And one of the things we do as banders is we stay away from the business end of a northern shrike, called butcher birds because they impale prey on barbed wire fences or thorn bushes. And early ornithologists thought that was just wanton killing, but it's been proven that they do that to cache food for periods of food shortages. Warbling vireo, lazuli bunting, of course, the quintessential bird of Colony Farm, gorgeous male cedar waxwing, orange crown warblers. These birds are part of the Oreothlipis genus with this very, very finely pointed bill. And they use that bill to insert into closed buds, which they then prise open to extract small insects and spiders. And one of the amazing things is they'll actually do that in the hand. So if you gently place a forefinger and thumb on the upper and lower mandible, the bird as a reflex action will basically push your fingers apart, which we get kids to often do to show this amazing reflex action of these warblers. Our brewer's sparrow, clay-colored sparrow, swamp sparrow, indigo bunting, red-eyed vireo, a brown-eyed vireo. Juvenile red-eyed vireos have brown irises, so you can see very much brown irises of this young juvenile red-eyed vireo. Common yellowthroat, savannah sparrow, male purple finch, downy woodpecker, and some of our baby birds, cedar waxwing, Swainson's thrush, baby tree swallow, and baby house finch. This is a great photograph. I was given this presentation once and somebody said it reminded them of one of those old Ukrainian gentlemen with the big bushy eyebrows and the big sort of hook nose, which I thought was a great description of our baby house finch. Baby black-capped chickadee, they always look angry. golden crown kinglet, long-eared owl, the old fields at Colony Farm, a preferred roosting site for long-eared owls, and some of the raptors we've caught: northern harrier, sharp-shinned hawk, Cooper's hawk, northern saw-whet owls. We're doing northern saw-whet owl monitoring this month. And when we're banding them, we use soft casting jackets, fabric restraints, while applying the band and taking measurements to ensure that they're not damaged. And we called this our northern saw-whet owl burrito. A nice male band-tailed pigeon. Males have that deep pinkish purple on the head and extensive green patch on the nape. And gorgeous male black-headed grosbeak again. These birds are always looking to bite. So just to prove that not every photo comes out perfectly, especially when the subject is black-headed grosbeaks that bite anything and everything in front of them. Here's one here choosing its own band. So that's really it, guys. Please visit us online, join the VARC Facebook group so you know what's going on at VARC. View our YouTube channel. I was saying to Colin earlier, we made a short 15-minute video on our banding station protocol, code of ethics and management, and I would encourage you to view it. It highlights that above all else, the well-being of every bird is our top priority at all times. And our social media links are at the very bottom of our website homepage. So if you just go to birdvancouver.com, go to the bottom of the page, you can click on the YouTube and Facebook links. As a charity and volunteer organization, of course, we rely on donations to continue our work. We're all volunteers, so please make a contribution, however small. And hopefully as COVID eases, we can arrange a Nature Vancouver field trip to the station, and you guys can see your donation at work. Attend a workshop. Again, we host both bird banding and bird identification workshops, and are now moving them both to virtual platforms. We did our first COVID special bird banding workshop a couple of weekends ago and had a fantastic feedback. Everyone had a great time and said they learned a lot and really took their interest in birds to the next level. So again, lots of information and testimonials on the website. Promoting conservation through research and education is really what VARC is all about. So thanks so much for attending this evening's virtual presentation. And if there are any questions, I'll be pleased to throw it open for a quick Q&A session. Thank you.